What's happening is Silas, back with another book review, the second book review for 2023. The first one was Chop Wood, Carry Water, which I really enjoyed. A relatively short book, but powerful. The second book for the year, um, the third book that I've read, but the second one that I've started and finished in 2023 is The 4 Hour Work Week, a book written by Tim Ferriss. Just as a heads up, so I've been aware of Tim Ferriss for a number of years. When I was doing ride sharing, I was driving for a ride sharing company, and I started downloading a bunch of podcasts to keep me occupied while I'm driving. And so I was made aware of Tim Ferriss during that period and started listening to the podcast. I bought Tribe of Mentors. I also bought Tools of Titans, and the book that really gave him his claim to fame was the 4 Hour Work Week. But for whatever reason, I was averse to reading it. I think a part of it was the title. It had me thinking it was sort of a gimmick. A friend of mine actually recommended the book, and I still just didn't want to read it. And so I put together a book list about a year ago, and I added it to the list, and I was like, okay, try to read it. And I'm disappointed in myself that I hadn't read it much earlier. I finished the book yesterday. There's also the 4 Hour Body and the 4 Hour Chef, which are bonus chapters in the book. I decided not to read those on this go round, so I'll be reading those separately. But I finished the actual book yesterday, and it's a lot of information. So if you read this book, it's not one of those books where you can just, read through it, sweep through it. I took a lot of notes. There's some activities in the book as well. But let's get into what the book is really about. The book is really about redefining your life and creating what's called a lifestyle design. So rather than sitting back and letting the world do what it does and letting life come to you, it's really about designing your life. There's a phrase that's used in the book quite often called the new rich, and it's really about curating and creating a luxury lifestyle that is opposite of deferring fun and fulfillment. So rather than waiting until you retire, create this life, design this life that can put you in a position where you can do what's called in the book mini retirements. Essentially finding out what you do well, defining that, right? Defining that lifestyle, eliminating as much as you can in terms of um, obligations that require you to be in one place, automating as many systems as you can to be able to create cash flow, and then being mobile, liberating yourself in a way where you can move around. Tim shares a lot of stories about people who have gone on mini retirements, people who work remotely from other places other than the place where they were actually assigned to work. This book is dated like any other book. So this is before COVID when the book was written. And there's a lot of resources in the book, a lot of websites, a lot of magazine references, some book references that if you go and check some of those now, they may not be as active or active at all, but there's always an equivalent of the resources that he provides in the book out there in the world. It exposed me to a lot that I didn't think I was capable of enacting. And after reading the book, it really has me at a point where I really want to go after living this life of the new rich. And there's some exercises in the book that really stand out. There's one called Dreamlining, where he asks a couple of questions about your current life and what would you do if there was nothing in the way of you doing what you wanted to do. What would you focus on? What are some things that you're the best at in terms of you're great at? And then there's some questions that he asks in terms of 6 months and 12 months. And so I did this exercise, and it actually, at the end of the chapter, they had these questions. I answered the questions, and there's a chart you have to create. And I did all of that, and it really got me to thinking about some really big ideas that I had never thought about before. So I have an idea that I want to get off the ground, that I'm working to get off the ground. Really, really big. It's going to be life-changing for me, life-changing for my family. I'm not ready to share it yet, but I was inspired by this book and the dreamlining process. The book talks to great detail about how to actually move into a space where you can automate things in your life. There are a lot of examples of people who wrote to their employers via email or memo, laying out a plan to be able to work remotely. And again, the book is it's centered in a time before COVID, before work from home was as prevalent as it is now. And it was a bigger ask of your manager to be able to work remotely. So he lays out examples, templates of memos that you can send to your managers, detailing how you're going to manage your process of working from home. He has a bunch of workflow sort of diagrams of what to do next, if this, then that. He also has a number of resources about traveling, long-term overseas, living remotely outside of the country. I mean, it's a big, big resource guide. It's a pretty big book, relatively speaking. It's maybe about 400 plus pages, including the bonus chapters for the other books. But I would say the greater part of the second half of the book just gives a bunch of resources that I'm going to actually go back and look at in more detail. I've gone back and put time in my calendar to look at some of the exercises, but I really enjoyed the information that he provided. Again, some of it is dated, so some of the sites that he recommends, they may not be in existence, but I want to reiterate the fact that those sites once existed is reassurance that there is an equivalent of that site or those sites out there. And I found that myself when I was doing some searches for some of the dated websites. There are equivalents now that replace those. So there's just a lot of information here for people that want to detach themselves from their workstation, and also want to detach themselves from their business or the work altogether. He gives some examples of things that you could do potentially to start your own business, licensing opportunities, wholesaling opportunities. He gives some real life examples that have been shared with him by people who wrote to him. So I highly recommend the book. The title for me was a turnoff initially. I thought it was gimmicky, but he truly has set out a blueprint for what you can live by in terms of working 4 hours a week. Now, there is a point in the book where he talks a bit about, well, what do you do with your time now that you have all these hours back? And he also admits that there are weeks where he works more than 4 hours, but he's working on things that he likes to work on. It doesn't feel like work. He also talks a lot about making sure that the people around you that are working for you have the systems in place so that you can step away. I can't remember the quote directly, but he talks about if you hand someone a bad system or a bad setup, then all you can expect is for them to take on that bad system or setup and it be a bad outcome. So you have to do the work up front to be able to create the systems that are important for your virtual assistant or your employees or your contractors to do the work while you're gone off doing whatever it is that you actually want to do. So the book gives some real detailed tips on how to vet a virtual assistant, how to vet new employees, sample assignments you can give them to test if they're ready for the load to be shifted to them to take on. He also talks about managing yourself and limiting yourself from being immersed in the business and trusting the systems. Checking emails, understanding that if there are emergencies, you have people in place that can handle those. He gives us a lot of detail on what it takes to be able to set up the systems so that you can move away from being so enamored in the work. And so going back to the point I was making a few moments ago, he was talking a bit about what do you do with your time now that you have free time once you've set up all these things. And let me say this to you, this is not like an overnight thing. It's going to take a lot of hard work to get there. But once you get there, he talks about that new phase that you're in life where you've got so much free time, or essentially time to do other things you'd like to do. So as he goes into detail about what that looks like, he also gives examples of things you could be doing with your time, whether it be volunteering to do other things or starting new businesses. But just being able to focus on getting out of the rut of being somewhere every day and feeling like your paycheck is only of value if you're sitting at a desk and if people are expecting you to be at that desk. He gives one example of a person who leveraged their BlackBerry and Instant Messenger, and before they actually approached their employer about working remotely, they just started conveniently or inconveniently never being at their desk, but responding to Instant Messenger. So much so that people stopped coming to their desk and just calling them and IMing them. And so that was the way in which they primed their coworkers and their manager to get them ready for being able to be away and to have that mobility. I could go on and on and on and on about the book, but I always think every book I read has value, but this book truly has value in a way that impacts a person that is sort of on the edge trying to figure out, should I take the jump and go out on my own? Should I ask for remote work? There's a lot of hard work that you have to put in to get to the point where you can have the 4-hour work week, but I think that it's doable, and he gives a lot of examples of letters that are written by people that he actually included in the book, their success stories and how they got it done. So I recommend the book. I think it's a good read. It's one of those books you want to keep around. Now, I've got certain books that I've read where I take notes and I don't need the book anymore. I can just give it away or donate it or just put it somewhere where it's not easily reachable and I can just review the notes. But this is one of those books where I want to go back periodically and look at the websites that are recommended, do the exercises. It's really a resource guide and not just a book. So highly recommend it. The 4-Hour Work Week, Tim Ferriss. Check it out if you haven't already checked it out. It's not a scam. It's not a gimmick. It is truly a resource and a guide for people that want to have what's called the new rich life.